there is this whole concept of light as a drug, not for regulatory purposes or in the pharmacological sense, but in terms of dosing and time. So if you use light as a supplement, right, for wellness and rehab and improving your resilience, you need lower amounts. But when you're trying to use it therapeutically, you need higher amounts in the right dose and the right time. That's how we are thinking about light, a photoceutical, if you will.
All right. So our guest today has 6 patents, 150 plus peer reviewed publications, 11,000 plus citations, an H index of 41. H index is how you measure in academia, you measure a person's productivity. And 40 is outstanding. So above 40 is like a very rare number. He is a professor at University at Buffalo. He's won the Young Investigator Award from the National Cancer Institute. He is a senior excellence in research from the World Association of Photobiomodulation. And he runs a photobiomodulation lab at the University at Buffalo. So my guest today is Dr. Praveen Arany. We met in person at the Quantum Biology Forum, where he spoke about his work and gave a presentation, which is now up on YouTube. If you'd like to watch the talks from that forum, they're very interesting. And Dr. Arany and I started to chat, so it was delightful to meet someone in person before having them on the podcast. That doesn't happen very much in the digital era. And what I find most interesting about what's going on for Dr. Arany is that, as you know, I just went through all of his credentials, his bona fides. And so I kind of thought that somebody who had reached that level, who is like the go-to person to peer review other people's papers, would be able to get his work published if he felt it was worth publishing. And that, in fact, is not the case. Even with all of the credentials I just ran through, Dr. Arany routinely gets his papers rejected by the major peer-reviewed journals when he wants to publish more about what he's finding out about light and healing. So what's going on? We had a really nice conversation. We talked about all different kinds of things: photobiomodulation, red light therapy, the state of education in general, and how to solve some of these problems. So I think a great way to solve the problem of people not being able to get their work published in the big peer-reviewed journals is to start a new one. And the Institute of Applied Quantum Biology is doing exactly that. We are on the road to launching a very niche, very small journal of applied quantum biology. It will be peer-reviewed, and we are in the process of putting together our editorial board. And Dr. Arany has graciously agreed to support and help us with that and to be on the board. If you would like to support this work, and if you're listening, I don't know why you wouldn't. This is what we're all here for. We're here to build the future we want to live in, to create the formats necessary to move the work forward that is actually going to make a difference in the world. And this will be an open journal. It will be free to read. There will be a very low fee to publish. It will be peer reviewed, and it will be funded by us, by the people. So if you would like to participate in that and be a founding funder of the Journal of Applied Quantum Biology, please go to qbcpod.com or iaqb.foundation. There will be a link with a tax-deductible donation if you live in the United States. If you don't live in the United States, please support us anyway. You will get public recognition on the website and in many other places to come. This is a huge move forward, and this is where the Institute of Applied Quantum Biology is going. So if you want to be a part of that, if you have felt in any way disgruntled with the current state of research, academia, or the medical institution and want to be a part of building something different, this is your opportunity. All right. Enjoy my conversation with Dr. Arany. And for your red light therapy needs that are not gone through clinical trials and FDA approved, but are nonetheless high quality, you know where to go, bondcharge.com, QBC in the discount box at checkout. And to make sure that you're tracking all the vitamin D that you can be making now that we're in the vitamin D window, at least in this part of the world, make sure to download the My Circadian app and put QBC Pod when you check out. All right, my friends, exciting times ahead. Seriously, we're doing all of this together. I appreciate you so much. It is a wild, wild world. Professor Praveen Arany, welcome to the Quantum Biology Collective podcast.
Thank you for having me, Meredith. Very excited to be here.
Yeah, it's going to be fun. And I think it's really cool. We met at the Quantum Biology Forum in Maryland last month. And on the second day of that conference, it was the International Day of Quantum. And here we are meeting again. And today is the International Day of Light.
Yep. I think things are lining, as we just said. I think things are lining really well.
Oh, things are lining up. Okay. So let's, I just read your full bio in the intro, which is, deeply impressive. You've contributed so much to the field of photobiomodulation. But you originally trained as a dentist. So how'd you end up here?
Yeah, so I think as a dentist, I was training about 27 years ago. I was actually doing a dental patient. And, we get a lot of patients who need all their teeth removed, and they need either dentures or implants to actually get them going. The thing that people don't appreciate much is that if you don't have teeth, not only does your nutrition actually get subsidized, but also your social self awareness of yourself actually is compromised. So we all want, as dentists, I think we want to rehabilitate the patient as quickly and as efficiently as possible. And this led to my reading of a paper. I was trying to figure out how can I do a better job being a dentist. And I read this paper which said that you can accelerate wound healing, and you can actually promote the healing faster if you use light. And to me, that sounded like a very hocus pocus thing. How can you shine light on human beings and actually change anything? And as I understood more and more about it, started doing research about it, I realized that the human body is fully capable of using light, right? Everything from our vision, our ability to see, is actually, we don't have light sensors in our body. So how are we able to perceive light? And turns out that there are actually proteins in your eye, rhodopsin, that actually sense light and create a signal that enables vision. We also know about vitamin D and sunlight, and how light spaces are good for your psychological state, for your mood, right? So we know that light can have an effect on the human body physiologically. So why can we not use it therapeutically? And that began my journey as a dentist exploring light. And as we will talk more about, I was astonished to find that our patients who were getting the light treatment were healing faster, and therefore we could rehabilitate them faster with implants and dentures.
Right. So it was your interest in wound healing, which is, you always want to accelerate healing, but particularly if it's someone's mouth, as you were saying, like they can't eat properly, it really could have potentially a lot of downstream effects to not be able to use your mouth. So you're highly motivated to help with this wound healing. So you're like, light, really? And now here we are 27 years later.
On the day of light, talking about light. So it's amazing how life has a way of, bringing you places. But you're absolutely right. I started as a non-believer. And after doing my own research and seeing the benefit it is doing in our patients, I am a firm proponent of using light in the right therapeutic manner. And we actually have, terminologies, we have clinical practice guidelines, and recognition now from policymakers as well as regulators that this treatment is genuine. It is not hocus pocus or, shining light on people and making them better. There is a lot of good science behind why it is working.
All right. So tell us about some of it.
Okay. So I usually start most of my scientific talks talking about how light, our general understanding of light is that, it is good for us. And starting from that point, I think we try to understand what does the light do once it enters our body or, interacts with our body. And there are three well understood mechanisms now that have been published in peer reviewed scientific journals. The one that most people understand and have heard about is an enzyme in the mitochondria. and the enzyme is called cytochrome C oxidase. Turns out, just like rhodopsin in your eye, cytochrome C oxidase can absorb light. And because it can absorb light, it changes its bodily function, which increases ATP and ROS. These are biochemical mediators inside the cell. And these guys in limited amount in the right time and the right place are beneficial, right? So we hear all kind of things about ROS or redox being bad for you, aging, cancer. We normally connect that with those. But if the right amount of redox is not present, many of our cells would not function, such as endothelial cells, cardiac myocytes, right, macrophages and lymphocytes. They all use very low amounts of ROS to actually kill bugs or communicate with each other. So the right amount in the right place, and that's what light seems to be doing with the mitochondrial mechanism, enhancing performance and resilience. As we learn more about different kinds of light treatment, we are also, we also highlight that it can actually relieve pain and inflammation. Turns out that there is a very discrete set of mechanisms involving opsins or right sensitive transporters or receptors. And when you use the right amount of light on the right cell type, you can relieve pain and reduce inflammation. The third mechanism was described by my lab, where we found that if you use the right amount of light in the right place at the right time, you can activate this growth factor, TGF-beta. And that's the mechanism, as you mentioned in the beginning of the podcast. We were looking for wound healing factors, and turns out that this is a very, very important central wound healing factor. Turns out this growth factor actually has a light sensitive amino acid. And because we can control the activation of this growth factor, we can harness its therapeutic potential. So when you're doing light treatments, it is now appreciated that light is not restricted to only going to the mitochondria or only staying outside the cell. It's going to go to all of the different cell types. And if you have pain, you have inflammation, you want to improve performance or resilience in case of cancer treatments, those kind of mechanisms are harnessed by the cells that need it most.
Incredible. And so I want to talk for a minute about, you're talking about a therapeutic use of light, based on, the scientific research that explains what the mechanisms of action are to produce certain results. The audience in this podcast is also quite well acquainted with the idea of needing to spend more time outside.
Sure.
And so could you just sort of speak to the difference between a healthy light-based lifestyle versus a therapeutic or clinical use of light?
That's an excellent question. We always get asked, is there a difference, right? If I can use the light for wellness and remaining healthy, how can I use it for when I have a disease state, a chronic disease or any other disease? And we draw the analogy between using the right amount at the right time, right? So if you use we think of it in terms of biochemical elements, right? So when you use a supplement in your food, it is usually a very, very low amount, and it is necessary for your normal function. However, if you have a disease state or any other chronic disease, then we actually give you medication. We give you pills, and there are surgical procedures. So the difference between them is the amount and the timing. And that's how we have begun to think of a light. There is this whole concept of light as a drug, not for regulatory purposes or in the pharmacological sense, but in terms of dosing and timing. So if you use light as a supplement, right, for wellness and rehab and improving your resilience, you need lower amounts. But when you're trying to use it therapeutically, you need higher amounts in the right dose and the right time. That's how we are thinking about light, a photoceutical, if you will.
A photoceutical. Oh, I haven't heard that. It's a whole new world.
Yeah.
Yes, because, and I think, at the Quantum Biology Forum, this was touched on by Professor Guy and Alistair Nunn and maybe a couple other people, the idea of needing to be outside to get the infrared light and the, the full spectrum sunlight being critical to our overall health. So what you're saying is we want to have like these sort of foundational aspects of, as a healthy lifestyle, spending, more time in natural light than in processed light or screen light, let's say. But then once you get if you're at a point where you have a serious illness or a condition that needs to be treated, it seems to me, and this is kind of what I think Lance Becker was saying as well, it's like there seems to be an option opening up beyond the pharmaceutical biochemical model for light. And that's when the dosing and the timing and all of the clinical details become really important.
Absolutely. So
Okay.
you can use it in different ways, and it is determined, the efficiency and the safety is determined by the dose and the timing, right? So Dr. Becker actually showed some startling results with mitochondrial transplants. It almost
That
sounds like
was so
science
great.
fiction. I'm like, my God, there are people who are doing this kind of fantastic cutting edge science, which is awesome. Compared to them, we are doing very subtle stuff. You're shining light on people in different formats. But I think there is a lot of synergy there. We just talked about the mitochondrial mechanism. So I think, to your point, using it in the right way can be the most beneficial outcome. And we always draw the analogy between even water and air, which are critical for your normal function, can kill you, right? The wrong amount in the wrong time in the wrong place can actually cause harm. But these are critical for your survival. And that's how we have begun to think of light. It's a little, I think, ingenuous of us to talk about how it can do so many different things, but it is all pervasive, right? So if you think about where light is present, from the largest celestial scales where we talk about, light between stars, light years, to the smallest subatomic particle which is held together. That's a quantum biology forum we attended. Everyone was talking about how the fundamental forces that hold subatomic particles together is electromagnetic radiation and light. So it is amazing that this entity is present at every known physical scale. And that is where I think there is a lot of potential
Whew. So just this is a podcast, right? Not a academic conference.
yeah.
So when you talk about the potential of it, you know, in a blue sky speculative way, like how could you see this unfolding?
Yeah, so that is I think the cool part about the field right now is the attention it is getting in popular media. I mean, everyone on popular social media, from the Kardashians to Ronaldo and all the athletes and all the film actors and actresses are using lights. They call it red light therapy in the popular forums, but it is the same treatment. So even though it is getting attention from different forums, biohackers, right? So people who are using, you have only one life, let's make it count. So why can't we get optimal biological performance from our body, right? So people who think about human performance, both neurocognitive and skeletal-muscular. I think it's amazing that even in the realm of wellness and fitness and resilience, this treatment is finding a center place. I think I have not seen too many protocols about optimizing lifespans without light being a part of that protocol. So it is getting a lot of good attention.
Yes, no, it really is. And it's interesting to me because I kind of sit sort of in the middle as I would say, a kind of observer and participant in terms of my own personal practical application of things. And there's the biohacking space where they're really focused on their own personal optimization of their own physical selves. And then the academic space, which is focused on the research. And then that was something I noticed as well. There's, you know, kind of a gap where the researchers, in order, if you wanted to create a, let's say, FDA approved of device or something that would be covered by insurance or something that could be adopted by a hospital system, is a very long, I'll say long path.
No.
Whereas you have all of these biohackers and entrepreneurs who just read the research and create and just try it out themselves or create a product and just take it to market. As was pointed out at the forum, there's a lot of crap out there, but there's also a lot of really good stuff. And I personally know many entrepreneurs who are not going the FDA approval route. They took their product straight to market, but they're very rigorous about making sure that they make high quality stuff that has all the right biological inputs according to the latest research. So how are, and I think they both have a place, both of those paths. Like, what are your thoughts on all of that?
No, I fully agree. I mean, we live in a world where information is changing every day, right? You go on Instagram, you go on social media, things are changing rapidly, and I think AI is accelerating that cycle. So the traditional way, and you're absolutely right, going to a therapeutic drug target or a surgical target, whatever, medical, clinical route is slow. And we are very optimistic that that's going to change soon. We don't know when, but hopefully it will change soon. But there is information that now is available for innovators, just like you mentioned, your colleagues, who are using it in the most ethical and appropriate way. There are always going to be bad players. I think that's just human nature. But I think what you're pointing out is that the good information and people who are smart enough to vet it themselves and validate it themselves are bringing it to market and are bringing it to people where it's needed. So I'm completely on board for a wellness strategy where we use light to optimize lifespan, but also health span, right? We talk about how we want to live longer, but live longer at the quality of life that gives us our ability to be physically active, neurocognitively engaged, socially active, right? So elderly people would enjoy their grandchildren a lot more if they were able to keep up with them, right? These little guys are running around all over the place. So if you could actually improve their neurocognitive performance, I think they would get a lot more out of their life. So I think I'm all about that strategy. But in the same vein, I think as we were discussing at the meeting, I think there is a place for the clinical treatments to also move forward. And we all are very hopeful that the FDA and the regulatory agencies in the US and everywhere around the world, I think, realign themselves to just agreeing to the slow rate of transfer. I think we have now very high resolution biomarkers, real time imaging. There are tools that we did not have even 10, 15 years ago that we have now. And those tools should accelerate the pipeline. There is no reason that clinical trials should take, 50, $100 million and 10 years, 15 years. That is not acceptable because we have better tools now to accelerate that. So I think both the domains are going to move forward. And again, people who are ethical about what is the information available, and I'm going to make a device that actually is going to help people. And like you, I know a lot of people who actually think like that and want to do good things, but they don't want to deal with the regulatory part, and that's totally understandable. I think there is a place for that. I think where you have to be careful you don't cross the line is the claims that you make, right? The therapeutic
Yeah.
claims. None of us want to promise something that we cannot deliver, right? That's just not what we do. But I think some people get enamored by, I don't know, they get waylaid by marketing and commercial concerns, and I think that's where some people bend the rules. But I think that's just things that you should avoid, and you should be smart. I think nowadays with ChatGPT and all these other AI based tools, information is no longer limiting. And funnily enough, I was having this conversation. I'm sorry, this is a little bit long
Yeah.
winded, but I think it's very interesting that knowledge bases. We were talking about our university is now hiring a new president who's coming in, and we were having this conversation with our colleagues among ourselves that this new president has to come in and understand that information is no longer the reason people come to college and institutes, higher level of education. They're coming for the experience to be able to innovate and think for themselves, right? So that I think is a big deal, because if you think about traditional, Ivy League schools or any place of higher education, it used to be their libraries. They had the books, they had the knowledge, so they were able to disperse it as they would like to. But now that limitation is gone, right? Anybody can pick up a phone or even a tablet and get the information. So now I think as higher education is evolving, professional education will need to evolve. We don't need to have like 5 years of. There is a place for clinical experience, clinical training, but there is no reason why it should be in that same classroom style lecturing. People learn in very different ways, and it used to be impossible to mentor each student, right? And that is why if you look at originally how professionals were trained, they were all apprentices, right? They used to come in and learn from the person who's doing things. And then we had all these classrooms, and we upscaled ourselves, I guess. And now we're going 100% back. We're going full circle back, and we are saying that each person learns differently, needs to be trained differently. And that is, I think, a huge opportunity for us. As we were talking at the quantum meeting, we don't think of mitochondrial transplants. People were talking about magnetic fields, crystals, electric fields, light, of course. All of these things which were considered, non-scientific, or not mainstream science, are now being given their due because they do have benefits. I think that's being acknowledged.
Yes, it's a really exciting time. Like it's and I feel to your point, it's changing almost weekly. The fluctuations and I think we're all familiar with the Thomas Kuhn and the structure of scientific revolution, or Max Planck's quote where you just have to wait for everyone who believed the old stuff, you have to wait for them to die for the new ideas to come in. Yeah. And I feel like those models are correct, but we're moving through the phases of them so much faster. Great. And because we do have these mechanisms for connection with the technology that we have and the AI, as you were mentioning, we don't need to wait for the old guard to fade out. We can create like a grassroots collection of people with the new stuff, and it can move forward more quickly.
I agree 100%. I think a lot of you hear about this fear about how AI is going to take over and be different. But the ultimate goal of an ideal AI is to become more human-like. And when we can accept people with human imperfections, why can we not accept AI with those imperfections, right? So having said that, I think we should be ethical about what we are developing, and there is a good reason for that. And even when we think about light technologies and how we're going to do the next generation, we have to be careful that we make guardrails around its inappropriate use. We know, like especially if we talk about lasers, today is a day of light, right? And they invented the very first laser. And unfortunately, most people who think about lasers will say it's like a device, it's a weapon, right? It can actually cause harm. And then some people who are, more familiar with the medical clinical use will talk about how precise and good lasers can be. Think LASIKs in the eye, right? We always tell people don't point a laser in laser pointer in people's eyes, but we're doing exactly that when we are clearing reshaping the eye so that you can improve vision. So it's a question of how do you use it and when do you use it in the most appropriate manner. And I think that is really, as you're mentioning just now, I think the AI is accelerating that in an unprecedented scale. I don't think anyone has ever seen, I'm going to venture and say, human evolution moving so quickly. Right? The world is changing rapidly around us.
Yes. And I think your point too about the universities is correct. Like we both have daughters at university right now, and I've had that conversation with her. And I remember, I think it was around around 2010, when they moved. I think it was called a MOOC, was like massive online something learning, and they put all of the lectures from all of the top universities on the internet, and everyone was like, "That's it, yeah. Universities are over. No one's gonna go." Because it's all on the internet now. You want to learn from the top professors in the world, just go online. But that didn't happen because that, as you were saying, that's not why people go to school.
It's the human element, and we were just talking before the podcast. I think our children enjoy not just the academic challenge, but also the social challenge, right? Many of our children are actually going out of the house for the first time, and they meet all these people, and they're trying to figure out, their social structure. I think those are things that you can't learn unless you're there in person. And that kind of segues into what I just said before about, working one-on-one with people. It is convenient as professors to teach a group of people the same content and then give them exams and evaluate them. But now, because of AI and the ability to track each person, you just pointed out that the MOOCs basically moved everything online. And we learned during COVID, or one of the good things about COVID was we learned that system is sustainable. For almost 2 years, I think 2.5 years, we were actually completely online or hybrid online kind of situation. And we know that the model works. We still turned out doctors and physicians and dentists and clinicians and engineers. Everybody, every profession actually had people graduate, right? Okay, maybe you can argue a little bit about what was their hands-on experience, but nonetheless, we know that the system works. We can tweak it now, and the technology is moving at such a rapid rate that if you narrow it down, even like I was having this conversation with a student the other day, and he was like, surgeons that need to do their job have to incise and reflect and do things. But if you boil down the actual mechanical tasks, they are what we do with, let's say, cooking, or when we're cutting vegetables, or the actual process is very similar, but it's the context in which they do it. And that is why you go to med school for 3 years or 5 years, depending on what program you're doing, to fine tune those skills. But it is at a pace that has been conventional, and that barrier is rapidly disappearing. So if you're interested, maybe like this is a bad analogy, but I have this bad habit of, if I start watching a series episode, I have to finish it. So I try not to do that during the weekdays. I do it on the weekend, but I make sure that I finish the entire series. uh, so if there are people who think like that in their learning as well, and they can digest it, how much of that can they reproduce and use? That's something that we have to come up with new metrics to enable them to evaluate them and make sure they are proficient or competent in what they're doing. So
Yes. And it's not, there's no barrier to access the information.
no more.
It's
That is
that,
absolutely true.
yeah, it's the training, the hands-on training in that we're going to need to figure out. And we've gone so far the other way. My husband's just sent me some research that was done over, I forget, I haven't looked at it closely, but many, many years. And they tracked the standardized test scores of students after the one-to-one laptop program was implemented in each school district. And their scores every single time dropped in the 5 years after the one-to-one laptop, because the children, it was just what you were saying, right? What you were saying, it was like the laptop made it easier for the teachers because they had every kid looking at the same piece of information at the same time, but the children weren't retaining it and learning, because that's not how humans learn. They learn by working with people.
And I think that is the opportunity with AI. I mean, there are lots of things we can talk about in terms of AI and light therapy specifically. But I think the key thing is that if there is no feedback loop, right, giving a laptop to a person is great, but also ensuring that they are getting information. Now, there is everything from vision tracking. Again, there is a privacy side to this discussions, but we have these, vision tracking systems, which will ensure that the student is actually paying attention to the content. And if it needs help, or they're not getting this message, there are ways to evaluate them in real time. It provides information beyond what is the curriculum or whatever is presented. And we have the entire web, we have the entire internet on our fingertips now. So I think that second part, where individualized learning is more objectively not only determined but also tailored, that I think is going to be a game changer, and that is coming. I think that's just a matter of time, and people will ask these questions. Luckily, I think our children, at least some of our children, are already in college, but the next group of people will ask, why do we need to go to college? Why do we need to go to any kind of professional learning? We can learn everything on the internet.
Yeah, no, it's going to be really interesting to say the least. And there's a pilot school in the US. I think it's K through 8. So for people not in the US, that's like up until about age 12, 13, called Alpha Schools. And they do, it's a private school. They do 3 hours in the morning of individualized learning with adult supervisors, but the content is individualized by AI.
Wow.
And then they spend the rest of the day doing things, building things,
Right.
putting on plays, doing woodworking, fixing cars, cooking.
No,
I'm like, that's a nice model.
And that goes back to, if you break down the task that you have to do as a professional, it is a very, very definable and objective part. And whether you're using simulators, whether you're actually using hobbies, gamifying your learning, I think those are absolutely future education strategies. And it might happen less than 3 to 5 years away. I don't think it's a 10-year thing. I think it's much faster. uh, so if you want to like become a surgeon, you need to know how to cut, you need to know how to sew, right? And there are so many other things that we do where we have to cut or we have to sew, everything from gardening to cooking to actual sewing and making stuff. So I think there are transferable skills that can be tweaked or gamified so that your learning is much more active.
Yes. And it's interesting how technology is bringing us back to that place. And there's a lot of people and listening to this who don't want their kids on screens at all right now. So it's all very interesting. Okay, I want to just pivot back to photobiomodulation for a minute. There's so much good stuff to talk about. So I did read this in the intro, but I just want to set the stage a little bit for your background in this field, and then I want to talk about how you've seen it evolve. But just for the listening audience, Dr. Praveen Arany is trained as a dentist, pathologist. You're trained as a biomedical engineer, and you have tenure as a professor at the University of Buffalo. You have 6 patents, over 150 scientific publications with over 11,000 citations, and an H index of 41. You're going to have to explain to us what that means. And your research has been featured in mainstream media publications in over 70 countries. You've received numerous awards recognizing your research, such as Senior Excellence in Research from the World Association of Photobiomodulation, the Young Investigator Award from the National Cancer Institute. Anyway, it goes on and on. But the point I wanted to make with that is that you are, deep on the inside of academic science and very, very well regarded in your field. And yet, as you told me over coffee, you still have trouble getting published. Your research is still routinely rejected by the mainstream peer review publications.
Yeah,
Like, how does that track?
So I was very fortunate to be tenured in the university. I think for those who don't know that term, it means it gives you academic freedom in terms of having a job, right? You are employed, so you can actually explore and do all these other stuff. We do have to do a little bit of teaching, but most of our focus is on research. So to your point, the publication world, the journal of peer review, has exploded, right? There are so many journals now. And it's not a question of can you publish it somewhere now, because there are always avenues to find. But now all of us are more aware that good quality science has to be published in a rigorous and reliable journal. And that's where it actually is a two-part problem. The first part is how do we publish in good reputable journals. The other part is what kind of work do we need to publish in that area. And as you look at for scientific biology, we think of Science, Nature, Cell as the big journals. And then for clinical, of course, New England Journal, you have JAMA, Lancet, all of these prestigious journals. When you look at what they have to do, if you look at the work that they do, it's a common disease or a common condition, right? There are only so many proteins and so many nucleic acids and so many diseases you can work on. But the quality and the level of science that they're doing is much, much higher. And so to the question of why are we not publishing photobiomodulation at the highest levels, part of the reason is we don't have the funding to support that kind of high level research, right? So you have to do a lot more patients, a lot more analysis, a lot more research, basically, before you get to that level of competency and quantity and quality of data that will be acceptable by those high level journals. The other part is, unfortunately, the perception of what this is, right? The light is never considered mainstream for many reasons, but photobiomodulation specifically has actually suffered from the misinformation that marketing folks have actually propagated to, again, make the good part is they made the devices available, but they made these claims that it can cure all of these things, which it cannot. Right. So that's where I think the misinformation, unfortunately, is the other barrier that the journals and their editors and the reviewers actually are pushing back. So these two connected problems, the lack of funding to do very good research, and people who review this research are the same people who have heard or misheard things that, about representing the field. So it's becoming a problem that has compounded itself. And that has been a massive challenge, actually. We are doing good science, but unfortunately, we don't have the right avenues to promote this and make this available. And even at the meeting, as well as after the meeting, I think we have had some conversations about how this treatment, photobiomodulation, is standard of care in supportive cancer treatments. Every patient who's getting chemo and radiation should be getting this treatment. But if you talk to an oncologist today in any, even a tertiary care hospital, but definitely a general hospital, they have never even heard of this thing, right? They've never even heard of photobiomodulation. And people who are benefiting usually hear from it, from holistic healers or integrative medicine or functional medicine folks who use it routinely. They don't think of it as something exotic. It's something that helps their patients. They're willing to try it. It's non-invasive. It's non-pharmacological. If you use it within the right parameters, it does not cause harm. So communication has always been at the center stage of human, evolution, I guess, and progress. And unfortunately, there are barriers, and you absolutely identified a key barrier, which is peer-reviewed scientific journals.
Right. Yes, and that's, just to that, when someone, I know a lot of people and someone in their family gets some kind of diagnosis and someone like me or another or a friend or somebody recommends that they, get a quality red light panel or something along those lines. And they say, well, my doctor didn't mention that, so it can't be helpful. Which is, and you just explained why their doctor hasn't mentioned it. So there is definitely a gap between what the science is showing to be the case, the results that people are getting when they do use photobiomodulation. But what you're saying is that the scope of the research has to reach a certain threshold for the big journals to publish it, but you don't get funding for that scope unless the big journals are publishing it. So you're like locked out of the loop.
Exactly. I think that's unfortunately how a very promising and proven treatment is not available currently. So the question I think we get asked all the time is, where is your evidence to do what you're doing with photobiomodulation? And then we point to the fact that 35 placebo-controlled randomized global clinical trials have noted that if you use photobiomodulation before chemo or radiation therapy, you will get less complications. And should the complications occur, they will be less severe, right? So there is a clear increase in quality of life and quality of care by using this treatment. And this is what we practice. So if you ask any clinician what are they practicing in their regular, patient care, it is usually the evidence at that level, systematic reviews and meta-analysis and clinical practice guidelines. And we are there with this treatment, but it is not being adopted. So yeah, there are so many unfortunate, unacknowledged barriers to care that are preventing it from moving forward.
And I guess what was surprising to me is that the weight of your reputation and your resume had no bearing on like the fact that I guess I just was surprised when you told me that you still got rejected all of the time. And so there doesn't seem to be any space, I guess, for innovation, right? It's like, okay, this isn't some random person making the case. Like, this is the person that we go to review all the other papers. Maybe he's onto something and we should like publish to see where it goes. But that's not how it works out. Like you will get rejected by the same journal that will then ask you to review all the other papers.
It's a very, very peculiar situation where even for like massive clinical trial grants, which are, that's how the science gets moved forward. Papers are great because it actually publishes the end goal of the research. But how do you do the research, right? So all the grants that enable all the research to be conducted so that it gets published, even that has the same problem you just mentioned, Meredith, that which is, people who have other views or not informed views of where we are in the field. Forget the person. We are all human beings. We have likes and dislikes. Fine. You can put that aside. But data is data, right? So if you have already proven that this treatment is effective, I mean, you should look at that proof and decide, what should they do next, right? It's really sad that when you look at the clinical evidence, almost 90 to 95% of that data that we use for the analysis is non-US based, right? And that is really, really a very sad statistic. This is, the prime place for where research should be. Research and innovation is happening and should be moving forward. And we are still not making that information available or the treatment available to our patients. So it's a really sad disconnect. And it's because of people who are being misinformed or not informed. I don't know what the right term is, but they refuse to look at the evidence in front of them. And like you said, there is a huge disconnect between, we are going to this person because this person is recognized for his expertise, but when he says something or she says something, you're ignoring it because it doesn't, add up in your framework of what science should be or what clinical work should be. That's really sad. And the meeting was a fresh breath of air. Believe me, I've gone to lots of meetings. I go to a lot of meetings. This is the first time I met, people who are so open about not only what they're doing, but what you bring to the table. I think that was an truly, truly amazing forum, the quantum biology forum that we attended together.
Yeah, no, it really was. I felt like I was sitting on the inside of a paradigm shift unfolding in real time. It was incredible. Those presentations were, I was, I'm not a scientist. So I'm like, I'm probably going to be a bit bored. I was not. I was on the edge of my seat the entire time. I'm like, I can't believe this is happening. And as you said, it was multiple different perspectives. They had some practitioners, they had scientists, they had communicators, and the space was being held for, okay, like, what does this all mean? What did you come away with? Like, because as an outsider, I feel like if the framework could shift a little in the direction of quantum biology versus just locked in on biochemistry, that would then have the cascade effect of opening minds to all of, photobiomodulation onto many other things. What did you come away with feeling, and what's your take on that?
I think there is a ceiling for our understanding of routine biology, routine physics, routine chemistry for that matter, right? Everything that we could potentially do, I would say we are already done. 95% of that has already been done. So the true innovation is pushing that boundary. And even the very concept of quantum interactions and quantum biology, quantum computing is much more, I guess, lucrative, but more understandable. But when you start talking about biological system and quantum effects, there's a very, very small cohort of people who think that's even real, right? And people who are actually willing to actually do clinical care, and that's true respect to all the clinicians who are actually pushing those boundaries. Um, I think we have. You're right. I think it was almost a watershed moment right there in that room when we were sitting and listening to people. That people are coming around to a whole group of people are actually coming around to realizing that not only understanding quantum effects but also applying them is going to revolutionize the way we are thinking about medicine, biology, clinical care, and we will truly surpass the limitations of current clinical care by actually going into that space. I think the potential is tremendous, and I think that excitement, you could feel that excitement in that room. I think throughout the meeting, even the coffee breaks, the evening happy hour, everything everyone is very excited about talking about what they're doing, but what they can do with you. And I think that's what we need a lot more of.
Yeah, the collaboration and the willingness and openness to collaborate, which I think will also be a hallmark of the quantum biologic era, because it did take those two fields coming together I remember reading The Coming Age of Quantum Biology with Jim L. Khalili and John Joe McFadden. And like the main thing that I remember about that book is the foreword where they each talked about how terrifying it was. And it was almost like they went undercover and like did their cross disciplinary experiments in secret because it was so frowned upon doesn't even seem like a strong enough word. It was taboo almost for what they were doing.
Yeah. And that's the funny thing. I think if you think about how we are where we are, it was because people were open to ideas and willing to question people, which is, I think, absolutely true. You should criticize, you should be cynical, you should, rigorously vet the new information. But when you see the evidence, right, we keep saying that, don't believe us, don't believe our institute, don't believe our organization, but look at the data, right? And the data speaks for itself. If people are getting better, people are, improving with this, and there are like tremendous, I'm sure your audience is very familiar with benefits in Parkinson's, benefit in Alzheimer's, concussion, PTSD, depression, right? So all of these where we don't have effective cures or cures or even management strategies, I think light could be an important part. I'm not saying it's the cure all, it's not the panacea for all of them. It's a part of the adjunctive holistic approach to how it should be used. And I think it's a growing movement. I think there is increasing realization, maybe more from the popular forum than the actual clinical forum. But hey, we'll take it for
I
whoever it
would
is.
say definitely more from the popular form because we're the ones who are suffering, right? Like
Take on
the
that.
legions of people who have a chronic illness that doesn't, I mean, forget having something better than a pharmaceutical. There isn't one for, chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia, all
Exactly.
of like all of these different autoimmune disorders. And people go to the best medical clinics in the United States and basically get told, here's your diagnosis. We'll see you in 5 years when you need a wheelchair, or we'll see you, and I talk to these moms who take their teenage daughters in. It's like, yeah, she has POTS. Here's what's going to happen. Bye. That's like, there's nothing. And so it is definitely coming from the public because we're like, why does the medical establishment, and they have lots to offer for other things, but in these cases that I'm sharing, why do you have nothing for us and still keep your eyes closed to possible alternatives?
Exactly. That is the sad part. And to be completely honest, that is the most frustrating part. I am at Buffalo where you visited and, we were able to meet. And I'm here and we have a tertiary care cancer hospital next door. We are still not able to do treatment for our cancer patients today, right? And it's purely a, administrative barrier that actually is preventing us from doing. We have the technology, we have the people trained, we have the equipment, but we're not still offering this treatment. And it really keeps me up at night and makes me angry actually
So
that
just to clarify, you have the cancer center on the same campus as the Photobiomodulation Institute,
it is, yeah,
and you haven't been able to implement photobiomodulation in their care strategies.
it has not been able to be operationalized. And part of that was because there weren't insurance codes, there was no regulatory approval. Then you have this whole
Oh,
you know
so
there is this whole group of things that prevent us from moving forward. Everything from insurance codes to regulatory frameworks to and clinicians being educated. Unfortunately, I think that's where we have narrowed our most of our efforts. Is not just publication. We were just talking about scientific journals. Uh, Communication is absolutely critical, but so is the follow-up training. Right? If you hear about it one time, it's not real. Forget about that. But then you hear it again, and maybe sometime the patient tells you, "Hey, what about this treatment? Can it help me?" You mentioned that you recommend a panel, and then they go to their physician, and the physician is like, "This is hocus pocus. Like, don't waste your time." If you don't know about it, doesn't mean it's wrong, right? So, and that's something that again, another very interesting conversation, recent conversation. It's amazing that we judge people based on our competence, not based on the data that we see or the evidence that we are evaluating, right? So if you have never experienced it, and we were talking about it when we met as well, the most strongest people supporters for this treatment are people who have benefited themselves or their loved ones have benefited. And usually it's someone with a chronic disease. You mentioned fibromyalgia, people with Parkinson's, Alzheimer's. There are unfortunately some management strategies, but they're not as effective. And we really strongly feel that the evidence is very good to add light as an adjunct. We're not saying replace your treatments, saying look at the evidence as an adjunct to improve your management care.
Right. But and it also seems that like the more popular a treatment, let's say we'll call it red light therapy as the popular version, and photobiomodulation we'll say is the clinical version, right? It's almost like the more popular it gets, the more followers on Instagram a certain topic has, the less scientific credibility or the less likely it is to be taken seriously. Instead of, right, like in the entrepreneurial world, you would look at that as a signal
Mhm.
versus a
Agreed.
disqualifier.
Oh, that's a great point. When usually you see something, available over the counter, you give it less value when someone prescribes the exact same thing. Maybe it's a little different dose, but those are the nuances, technical nuances, right? But you're absolutely right. I think the perception has been a big problem. And of all the things that I think we discussed when we met, I think one of the things that stood out was what do we need to move the needle, right? Is it information? Is it more training? Is it more regulatory guidelines? Or is it actually a policy guideline? And you'll be amazed that almost all of them have been ticked at some point to some degree. It's not the best in everything. We have insurance code, like I said, in dentistry now that is allowing us to do this treatment in a time-based manner, right? So if you have a large lesion versus a small lesion, we can actually do 15-minute increments for reimbursement. And I honestly, that's the way the system works. So we adapted and we made sure that we tick that box. Should we do that for every disease? Sure, but then that will be like a bigger lift, right? So I think we are very thankful and grateful that we got that one code. But now the medical community has to adopt it, and that goes through CMS and IOM and other regulatory agencies. So I guess as a scientist, it is nice to see we do science to benefit people, and it's nice to see our science actually translate into a treatment or a therapy or a device. But I think more importantly, it would be very gratifying to see those patients not suffer or reduce their suffering if they could get it in a timely manner. So hopefully in our lifetime, and that's yeah, that's been always our goal, to try and bring it to the right people's attention.
Yes. Yes, and I think we're all working together to shift that. And what would your thoughts be? And we did talk about this a little bit of, let's say, like a independently funded niche journal
Yeah,
that
so
would peer reviewed, that would publish light based research.
I think there's a lot of, as we were discussing, there's a lot of interest in um, the reason human beings are so unique and the human race is so unique is because we can communicate effectively, right? So I don't think I've known of any. I mean, there are other modes of communication, but there are no known abilities of other species to be able to so broadly and so quickly spread information. Despite that, we are finding these barriers that exist, right? So everyone, and I've had this conversation with some colleagues, when I'm sitting with them one on one and talking to them about that, they'll give you the full attention and the, I guess, the benefit of doubt of what you're saying and look at you more objectively. But when they're in a group that they don't want to be the odd person supporting it or saying something wrong. So I think that group effort is still lacking. So, and that when you talk about groups and forums, that's where I think a unique journal that actually is rigorous, there is no question that the quality has to be maintained. And people like Dr. Becker, and we met so many people in that quantum biology forum. These guys are cutting edge. I mean, very very well respected professionals. I don't know if they have the time to contribute. I think that's the biggest challenge. But
Mm-hmm.
if you can get people like that to look at the work that's coming through, that would be really really, I think, a big step forward for the field. Having a journal that actually gives you useful real information. And I think those barriers, we think about, and again, this is a pet peeve thing, but I think the New Yorker magazine is amazing. I mean, you look at the graphics and you look at how they do their fonts, and it is not a scientific journal, but it is visually attractive. I don't know why science has to be boring. I've never understood why they don't give us the, I had a lot of, like I was mentioning to you, Many of our, even letters to the editor where they actually reach out to you saying, do you have an opinion? And then you write a, something written, but you like to put an image because, a picture speaks 1,000 words. And I've tried to use New Yorker style graphics, and they shot me down. They're like, this is not scientific. This doesn't make sense. So if you do start a journal, which I think I would love to support and be involved with, I wish we could take away that seriousness of science. Science should be fun. There's no reason why it should be boring graphs, and why not? I mean, you can have a nice uh, visually appealing format that makes science interesting. I think that's one of the things we are concerned about, is that yeah, we are geeks and nerds. There's no question about it. We love doing what we are doing, but there's no reason it has to be boring when you're communicating.
I totally agree. That's like the best feedback I've had so far.
Yeah, almost a magazine journal, almost a magazine journal. Which is what, if you look at why Cell, Nature, Science, well, not Cell, but Nature, Science are so popular, they're not truly scientific journals. They're actually magazines. Of course, they have commercial sponsors and all that stuff. Okay, fine. You have to sustain yourself. Let's be practical. You can't start something and expect it to live on philanthropy alone. It has to be a model that is sustainable. Even in research, I mean, we have lots of good ideas, but unless someone funds us, we can't do those ideas. So you have to be practical about those. But there's no reason it has to be boring. I mean, and that's the part that, and especially with all the AI-based, web-based services now, we mentioned, when we were talking, we talked about, how expensive it is to start a journal and to sustain it. Starting something is relatively easier, but keeping it going, because you need contribution, you need content, and you need the right people to review it. That
Mhm.
is a big ask on time and effort. So, uh, but I would strongly urge you to consider, doing that. That would be awesome.
Well, Dr. Arani, I think we will. And everyone listening, like this is, um, you know, this is possible. I think a lot of the times when we hear about these big institutional barriers to change and innovation, we feel powerless and helpless. But again, as we've talked about with the pace of change, the pace of technological change, we can come together and make whatever we want.
Yeah.
Can make a very niche, rigorous journal of applied quantum biology because why not?
And thinking of the barriers, we were just talking about why is this information not more widely available? We are moving away from textbooks. The textbooks is an antiquated concept that, every 5 years, even the best textbooks are updated every 5 to 10 years, right? Right now the information is coming through so rapidly, and the journals are basically the I don't know, the gatekeepers, I guess that would be the term, where they can actually define what is the highest levelity of science. And we should use it in the course we are teaching next week, and we do that for papers now, right? We see a very exciting paper, I don't know, about whatever we are working on, wound healing, right? So we like to present that to our class, acknowledging that it's the latest and the greatest thing that we can actually prepare for them. Of course, there are textbooks and chapters and stuff which we put it in other reading, but we try to present the latest science. So I think a journal that actually in quantum biology specifically that is promoting the best research and the best science that we have would be, I think, one of the ways of reducing that barrier of information and enabling the new workforce to be trained, but also the existing workforce to orient because it's a reliable source of data, right?
Right.
So,
Yeah, and I think that's, I hear a lot of people thinking like, oh, the next generation of med students will learn this. And I'm like, no, you can like learn it now. I know hundreds and hundreds of practitioners who just went and studied it and are now applying it, which is why the other piece I think that um, the nonprofit is looking at is the practice-based research network, which I
absolutely.
know you're familiar with. So, what are your thoughts on how that could contribute?
So it's a concept that deserves a lot more attention than it's getting right now. It's an amazing, very practical, very relevant. People at the front lines of clinical care are the practitioners, and you're cutting them out of the loop of all the research innovation because they're not in an academic center, they're working for profit, whatever. I mean, we all have to make a living, right? Why not? You have trained so hard, you absolutely have a right to practice in the setting that is most attractive to you. But why does that prevent you from doing research? That's the part that I've never understood. And when this concept of practice based research network came along, especially for our field, right? Because we have so many practitioners using light, but they're not in the conventional academic setting or even in a hospital setting. They're usually, small clinics or small medical spas or, different settings, wellness clinics, integrative clinics. Um, I think it is going to be a game changer if we get organized. I think there are still some. Um, you mentioned about how revolution needs people, some people to move on. There are still, unfortunately, barriers to its implementation. It is not. It is great as it is right now, but it can be a way, way bigger if people really buy into that concept and support it. I think a lot of clinicians don't want to go to courses, don't want to, do all the other learning because it disrupts their what they signed up for, which is to do clinical care. But if you integrate that into their practice and say, hey, this information is going to actually help you do your job better, right? Yeah, I'm happy to do that, even if I have to spend a little more, few more hours training and buying a new piece or getting a new piece of equipment. It would really elevate. All of us want to do. We do what we do because we love doing what we're doing. So I think the practice-based research network is a massive, underappreciated tool, uh, which can be significantly fortified if we have the right people behind it and the right questions. And again, we have tried to engage with some of the PBRNs with our light, photobiomodulation and light-based interventions, and we have gotten the same pushback we're getting from journals and reviewers. Is like, we don't think this integrates well into our current system. So again, it's a question of information, and maybe it's the journals that will actually make a difference, and forums like this. We have been promised that the quantum biology meeting will be every year or every other year, whatever it is. And I think I'm really looking forward to those because I think those are catalysts to actually get going on many of these projects.
Yeah, no, they absolutely are. There's a certain kind of energy that gets unlocked when you're in a room, when you're used to being sidelined, and then all of a sudden you're in a room with people who are like, "Yeah, totally, I get it. Oh, really? Oh, I didn't know about that part." Like it's like,
Yeah, and you could feel that, right? So many people we were talking to do not do, for me, do not do light, but they were so excited about what they're doing and wanted to learn more about what you're doing to see how that comes together. So I think that openness, I think, was a very big differentiator in that forum. That there are people who are like, I think they came to that. I guess we are self-selecting in many ways. We came to what we were doing by being open-minded, and I think that forum was basically a great meeting ground for us.
yes. Yeah, and thanks for your comments on the practice-based research network. M- when I, was introduced to this concept and we're just sort of testing it out and piling it out right now, um, nobody knows. Like there's like clinicians don't. They're like, oh no, I can't do research. I don't have a statistically relevant number of patients, or oh no, I'm not affiliated with an academic center, or no, and they just like they think there's one model and they don't fit in it, so they can't contribute. And I think like the key piece of information I want all clinicians to have is you can contribute.
Yeah. I start many of my clinical talks with clinicians are watching nature do its experiments. And if you pay
Uh,
attention to each patient, you will learn how nature is changing things, right? So you are a scientist, whether you like it or not. Every clinician is a scientist to begin with. Of course, we have been taught to, deal with each patient in a particular way. We try to be, cookie cutters and try to put them in because we know that's a safe way of treating them, which is great. We take care of 90 to 95% of our patients by just doing routine care. But that 5% of patients which we either refer out or, we kind of ignore or whatever, however we manage, I think that's where we learn. So we're just saying that the practice-based research network gives you that support. It gives you a person to call, maybe a place to train, and maybe there are some resources that are available to clinicians. So, like as a dentist, I think cone beam CTs and X-rays and lasers, not X-rays, but lasers are exotic things that we don't normally invest in our practice unless we have a specific need. But by joining the practice-based research network and doing research in that space, will incentivize you. It may not buy you the thing, but it'll get you there in terms of the training and the background. So I think there's huge value. I almost think PBRN is uh, it's the model for education moving forward because we all have to make a living. Let's not, we all have to make a living, right? So while we are doing things, can we also learn? And there's always been this lifelong learning concept, but it's not implemented. I think this gives you a framework to implement that. By being involved with something new that is being tested, you're pushing the boundary. It's not like you're just testing a device, but you're actually pushing the boundaries. So I think PBRNs are, I honestly think it's the future of education and training.
Wow. I love that clinicians are scientists
Yeah.
watching nature unfold. What was it you said? Could you say it again? It was so good.
Yeah, I read it in a book somewhere, so I can't take credit for the quote, but it's actually in a textbook of pathology. I'm going to blank on the name, but I was reading about how we see different diseases, and if you think about the disease, it's basically nature doing an experiment, right? So you see a patient presenting pain, inflammation, infection, because nature has done something to change their way they're living or their physical environment or their internal environment. So being a clinician is watching nature do experiments. And if you pay attention, you can actually learn more than just managing the patient. So we always say we love saying take care of the patient, not the disease. But it's very difficult to implement that in practice. I think that's been a huge challenge for multiple reasons. But that's why I think there's a lot of learning that we can actually benefit from.
Right. Yeah. And then I see what you're saying that if you're part of a practice based research model, then you are just naturally going to shift that mindset to being a scientist, to being a detective versus ticking the boxes.
And I have a lot of, I was mentioning to you that I have a big lab and, I have lots of people and a lot of them are clinical people or preclinical people who want to go into clinical fields. But once you're exposed to that research way of thinking, question your baselines, question your comparatives, look at it objectively, but pay a lot of attention to the subjective part because that's what a patient is. Everyone thinks of pain very differently, right? So they're very, everyone experiences pain, but the pain is not just a physical symptom, it's actually an experience. So when we teach people how to do research, they learn how to be better clinicians as well. And it can be the other way as well, right? So I think it's amazing. I think all clinicians should learn to do research methodology, but being involved in PBRM is a great way of integrating that into your mainstream care.
So good. Okay, so to wrap up, let's pretend that you've been given a grant of unlimited funding. What would you love to do?
I think the so I am very realistic about, we discussed so much about quantum biology in that forum, but all that was showing you a window into what's possible. Once you start looking through that window, you see the complexity and the massive question we have to answer. So I'm a realistic person thinking I can't solve it. But what I can do is train the workforce of the future, right? So a large part of what I would love to do with unlimited resources, and I think this resonated even with Dr. Becker and everybody else who was speaking. Mark actually spoke about it, and there were so many amazing number of speakers who spoke about how many of us would like to train the next future workforce, and they would actually help in solving the problem. So a large part would be setting up a forum or a center that allows us to do that, do the good research, both clinical and discovery research, but also enable us to train the next generation of workforce. Because there are much smarter people than we are, who can solve many problems that we look at it from our eyes. But new people coming in, looking at this, they're not held back by those same conventional barriers. So I think
Right.
them would be, I think, a huge goal of unlimited resources if ever made available.
Yes. Yeah, I mean that's so true. Like what would be possible if you had all these brilliant minds coming in with quantum biology as the starting point
Yeah. I
versus
think,
something you have to wrap your head around later. I mean, I think you can do both. I've seen a lot of functional medicine doctors wrap their head around quantum biology. Uh, but yeah, like what would that look like?
yeah. Besides the physical space and the resources, I think the policy change that it could bring along is massive because all of us are looking for good and reliable information. Even clinicians, right? When they are presented with information, they're looking for a reliable source, whether it's, like you said, a journal that actually people can look up to and believe in terms of rigor and, quality of publication, but also a place where they can go and train or you know uh, call up and say, hey, we have this problem. Can you help us with moving this policy part forward? So we need a central, like a conference is amazing, but it's very transient. It's 2 days in a year, hopefully every year, but it's still a limited time. But a physical forum would be, I think, very, very important to calibrate people, to promote the right ideas, but also act as a training ground for established clinicians, but also the upcoming workforce. I think those are key things that we should try to accomplish, that I aspire to do. Let me be very clear. I think that would be a big aspiration for me at this point in my career. I'm tenured, I'm very comfortable where I am, but I think that would be very challenging, but I think it would be very exciting to be able to put a forum like that together.
Yes. I mean, that would be a legacy that we all need. Professor Arany, Dr. Arany, thank you so much for your time today. I could chat with you honestly for all day long, but I will wrap it up, and we'll have to do this again sometime. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for inviting me. And I think those are very thought-provoking questions that I think we are thinking about as we have had few previous conversations. But I would urge your audience, I think you have the right, forum to have them ask these questions and also raise these questions to policymakers, right, their clinical care teams, but also their loved ones, right? So, it would be great to inspire the next generation to actually make that breakthrough. Thank you for having me. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Praveen. You have made it to the end of another episode of the QBC podcast. Congratulations and well done. Don't forget to visit us at qbcpod.com. That's qbcpod.com. You can find all of the episodes, all the links in the show notes, the tools that I use, links to the Institute, all of the things. And please do join the QBC free community if you haven't. That's where we send most of our updates. All right. Thanks for being here. If you also, please make sure you rate this podcast wherever you listen to it. There's so many millions of places these days, but it really helps. We really appreciate it. Thank you for being here.